Hello, and thank you for joining us for an episode of the Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton webinar series. Joining us today is David Lamb. Mr. Lamb is the project manager of our Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton program at the Soil Health Institute. As project manager, he leads our soil health training and education programs, which seek to increase adoption of soil health management practices among cotton producers. Mr. Lamb came to the Soil Health Institute after 40 years of service with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. He held a number of positions at NRCS, including District Conservationist at the Fort Wayne Field Office in Indiana, Assistant State Conservationist for Programs in Georgia, and Team Leader for the National Soil Health and Sustainability Team. Mr. Lamb earned his Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources from Ball State University in 1978. In this webinar episode, Mr. Lamb is going to talk to us about the basics of soil health. He will provide historical context for soil health, as well as introduce the Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton project and its funders. Mr. Lamb will also define soil health and soil functions and the impact that healthy soil has on resource management. Mr. Lamb, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Camille. And I want to welcome everybody who's participating in this webinar and hoping you're having an enjoyable day. Let me click share here. The Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton project is a joint partnership between the Soil Health Institute in partnership with Wrangler Jeans and the Walmart Foundation. And the Healthy Soil Sustainability Cotton webinar series, what we're trying to do is establish a series of webinars that build upon each other. After my presentation today, I kind of set the ground floor, if you will, of what soil health is about, and we talk about soil disturbance and those things that influence soil function. We're going to follow up with a presentation on understanding the linkage between soil biology and its relationship to soil health, and start to begin to be able to build a soil health planning process by understanding the four basic principles of soil health planning, and then get into more nuts and bolts, if you will, when we talk about nutrient management, pest management, more from an ecological perspective, followed up by how-tos of using cover crop species selection, termination, those types of things. And then getting a little bit about the economics of change of soil health. And when you talk about those things that put money in your pocket, is there a cost benefit for that? And also the environmental impact that it might have. And then follow that with a planning session. Okay, now that we understand these principles, we understand a little bit about the biology in the soil and the economics and all those types of things. How can we put this together and develop a system that we can implement? And then the last one we'll be talking about, okay, how can we evaluate the current status of your soil with relation to the soil health systems that we're talking about and we've identified in the previous webinar. So hopefully you can join as we release these over the coming months and participate, and it'll stimulate some interest in you, and you might be able to seek out some help from some folks. But to begin with, let's just talk about soil health. You can't pick up an agricultural magazine today and not have something in there related to soil health. It also in the mainstream media. I had a friend of mine who was actually visiting in India and picked up, was reading the morning paper, and there was an article that was from the New York Times, had been sent over there, and it was talking about soil health activities that producers in the state of North Dakota were doing currently to change how their systems and how they're doing things. And here they were sitting in the country of India. So it's really got a global perspective about it. Talk about the drivers behind this. And I know people don't really like this idea that we're talking about, there's going to be another 2 billion people show up on the planet Earth in another 20 years. But it's really more the impact that agricultural is having on the rest of the Earth. You know, the Earth, if you think about it as an ecosystem. You know, the impact that raising food and where these people are going to live and all that type of thing. And the idea that we're going to have to not only, you know, maybe raise more food, but we're going to have to do it with competing resources. Some people say that we're going to have to raise more, as much food as we've had in the last 500 years, we're going to have to raise in the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's a tremendous burden on there, and I think we're up to it. It's not only just raising food, but it goes beyond that when it talks about food spoilage and those types of things. But what role does agricultural production play in that? And you think about doing that on competing land space. We have people come to the earth, they got to live somewhere, and if we raise our standard of living, people tend to occupy more space on the planet. They have a bigger footprint. You think about it here in the United States, how you have individual houses. We don't all live in apartments. That's kind of our goal, the American dream, if you will. And you look at the use of land, like here in the United States, in that period of time between 1982 and 2007, we lost 14 million acres of prime farmland. It's been lost to urbanization, development, highways, roads, those types of things. And that's kind of a very irreversible trend or land use, if you will. It's hard to bring that back into production once it's lost. And here we're a country that's supposed to have a little more enlightenment when it comes to those things. And then you add to that this whole idea of energy demand. Agriculture is a huge user of energy. It takes a lot of energy to produce biofuels. Now, most folks don't realize in any given year, 45% of the corn that's produced in the United States is not used for animal feed or for human feed, for that matter. It's actually used for ethanol production. When you see it every day when you go fill up your tank with gas. So it has a tremendous impact on that. And you take a crop like corn, it's what I call the big input hog. It takes a lot of additions to have a successful crop. It takes a lot of fertilizer, and fertilizer production is a huge energy source. It takes a lot of energy to produce a ton of fertilizer, such as anhydrous ammonia or urea or something like that. Somewhere in the range of 30 to 35,000 cubic feet of natural gas to produce 1 ton of natural fertilizer, or of nitrogen fertilizer, excuse me. And then we have this attitude that a lot of these resources that we use for agricultural purposes, since we get sunshine, we get rain, we get nitrogen out of the atmosphere to produce nitrogen fertilizer, tend to be are unlimited, and that's not true. Phosphorus is mined. We mine rock phosphorus. Most of ours here in the United States comes out of the state of Florida. And we've kind of gotten the easy stuff. And it's kind of scary because if you look at some forecasts, that the idea that we're going to run out of phosphorus fertilizer, or the opportunity to get that sometime in the next 40 to 50, 60 years. And that's a little scary when you think about it in the context of longevity related to the country. So when you add all those kind of things, there's a lot of drivers that are moving this effort to farm more sustainably. Fortunately, the NRCS, the USDA agency responsible for managing resources, jumped on that bandwagon a number of years ago. They have an excellent Unlock the Secrets of the Soil campaign going. There's a lot of good information out there when you can see videos and farmer profiles and that type of things. And they're doing their part. And actually, if you look in the Farm Bill, the recently passed Farm Bill, the term soil health was referenced 47 times, I believe. Now, that's a new one. And the previous Farm Bill wasn't there hardly at all. So we're seeing an increase not only from the government side, through the programs and stuff, but there's also a spinoff, if you will, of institutes such as, or organizations, not for government groups such as the Soil Health Institute, who our primary mission is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soil through scientific research and advancement. And why is that important? Because there's a lot of folks out there who say, where's the science behind soil health? Well, there is a lot of science out there that support the principles that we advocate related to soil health. It's just not under the heading of soil health. If you would go out and do a Google search for cover crops and impact organic matter and those types of topics, you'd see all sorts of peer-reviewed articles that support the principles. And this is what the Soil Health Institute is trying to bring to the forefront. Where's the science behind that, and continue to advocate and support that. So you have farmers interested, you have the government interested, you have the not-for-profit groups such as the Soil Health Institute, but really the driver behind our project is the private sector. Wrangler Jeans has been really out front with this. This publication, you can go to their website, Google Wrangler Sustainability, and you'll find this Seeding Soils Potential. And basically what they've done is put together a little handbook. It's about a 20-page publication that talks about those things that cotton producers can do now to develop a system and that can improve the health and function of their soils for future generations. And I really like this quote by the Director of Sustainability at Wrangler, a gentleman named Rowan Atwood. He says, Wrangler believes that our supply chain does not begin with fabric or cotton or the processing. It begins with our soil and the land itself. Preserving and enhancing the health of our soil is critical and necessary to the preservation of Americans' denim heritage and future generations of people who work the land. You think about it, that's a pretty powerful statement. You know, they feel that their responsibility doesn't just start when they buy the cotton from the producers, but they have a responsibility to help encourage sustainable production of cotton. Why is that? It's a company philosophy, but it's also be driven by consumers. They're wanting to know, American consumers wanting to know, what kind of impact is the products that I buy having on the environment. Take the U.S. cotton industry. They just recently released what they're calling their Pathways to Progress. It's a 10-year sustainability goal document that kind of outlines some strategies that they like to see cotton producers adopt or help them meet over the next 10 years. It's not from the manufacturing side, it's from the production side actually in the field. These goals are there to help retailers and those folks that are involved with the selling of the product to educate and inform their customers that the cotton industry is leading the way in sustainability. And they've actually come up with what they're calling a U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. And the whole purpose of this is it's a self-evaluation. You can go online and there'll be more about this and down the road from the cotton industry. But basically, they're wanting farmers to go through this self-evaluation where they answer a series of questions, and it lets them know where they're going as far as their farming system related to their sustainability goals. They're looking to have a number of farmers over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. They're hoping to get like 2.5 to 3 million acres, and they're going to help the industry meet their goals because there a number of companies such as Wrangler, Levi, Ralph Lauren, they have a projected goal of purchasing 100% sustainable cotton by the next few years, 2020, 2025. You can see the numbers there. So what the trick is, what is sustainable cotton? And that's where the rubber kind of meets the road. Well, within the publication, they've actually identified what they call these key performance indicators. So they want to be able to show the American public that over the next 10 years, that cotton producers have increased soil carbon on their farms by 30%. They want to be able to show that they've increased land use efficiency. What's that mean? That means they're producing more consistent and higher yields across the landscape, across all the cotton acres by 13%. They want to show a decrease in greenhouse gas emission. They want to show a decrease in soil loss per acre. They want to see a decrease in water use and decrease in energy by cotton producers with their systems that they've adopted. Well, if you look at all these, and hopefully as you gain an understanding about what a soil health management system is, you'll see that if a cotton producer implements a soil health management system, they will help their industry meet all of these goals and actually help exceed them. Because improving soil health, improving soil function helps with all these indicators. So the project itself, we're in partnership with, as I said earlier, the Soil Health Institute, Wrangler Jeans, and the Walmart Foundation. And the goal of the project is twofold. One is to quantify and expand and verify the productivity, environmental benefits of the soil health management system used by cotton. That's the goal. And we're working in 3 states right now, Arkansas, Georgia, and North Carolina. And then in 2020, we're bringing 3 more states. You can see California, Mississippi, and Texas on board. What are we doing? We're doing intensive farmer training, peer-to-peer training. We've identified some what we're calling farmer mentors, those producers who have implemented a system long enough that they've started to see some of the benefits of the implementation of the system. They started to see increase in soil organic matter, a more robust nutrient cycle, and so forth. And then we've also working to have a soil health specialist, someone there, a technical specialist that can help producers design a system, implement a system, help them determine what cover crops to use, help them design when to terminate them, and that type of thing. And then the second key objective or goal of the project is to quantify. How can we document and show the Americans consumer that producers are, by implementing this system, they are helping to meet the goals of the cotton industry. And we're going to use various tools such as the field print calculator, in-field soil health assessments, and those type of things to get that happen. So to begin, really need to go back to the beginning, our basic understanding of soils. Most farmers and agricultural people, everybody's had some kind of a soils course. We understand from either a university or FFA or something like that, or even some extension training throughout your life. You understand that soil is made up of three basic components. You got the chemical, physical, and the biological component. And we know an awful lot about the chemical. You can go on, we know about cation exchange capacity, we know anions and cations and those types of things. And there's a wealth of information. If you go to the NRCS's web soil survey, you can find out the soil series, where you're standing at that particular moment in time. It's a lot of information. Same thing with the physical. We know about soil texture. We know about horizons. We know about structure. All those things kind of information, and that's really been the foundation of our agricultural system today. But there's a third component, this idea that there's biology taking place in the soil, that there's organisms that live and contribute to agricultural function. That's kind of a new thing. We've known it a long time, but we haven't put much emphasis on it. And that's really where the soil health movement is taking us in that direction. We also know that the ideal soil is composed of half of its airspace and half of its solids. Of those solids, we have inorganic materials such as sand, silts, and clays. We also have, various nutrients, the 16 essential nutrients for plants, that type of thing. But then we also like to see some organic matter in the soil. The ideal one having 5-6% organic matter. Why is that important? Organic matter helps to provide moisture. It helps to improve the tilth of the soil. It's got all sorts of benefits to it. And the other half of the soil is supposed to be holes, either occupied by air or by water. And if we disrupt that system, if we get that out of balance, then we have to compensate it some way or through our agricultural operation and that type of thing. So this slide's kind of interesting. That's not a shot of the Milky Way or anything like that. That's actually a microscopic view of a soil slide down at about 2 to 3 inches. And you can see all those look like stars. Those are just soil particles, either sand, silts, or clays, probably more sands than anything, quartz or something like that. But what you're not seeing is that, remember I said the ideal soil has 50% of the place soil has pore space? You don't see much pore space. Why is that? Well, this soil has been through under a conventional tillage. It's got low porosity. It means it's got very few pore space. It doesn't have a variety of pores. What we really want is a macropores and micropores. So you kind of create this network that allows water to infiltrate through the soil. Here's a same soil, different management. These soils are the same soil series, and that means they were formed under the same soil forming processes that all soils are, time, parent material, vegetation, landscape, those types of things. All were influenced on this or formed these soils, but the difference is how the farmer managed it. This one was managed, producer used no-till with cover crops. What's the difference? Look at all the pore space. You got big pores, you got small pores, you got micropores. You got room for roots to move through that soil profile to access those resources that plants need to grow. Again, this has got nothing to do with, this is the way the soil was originally formed. It's man's activity over time that has caused this loss of pore space and reduced and had an impact on infiltration, aeration, and those types of things that are important. So soil health, what is it? We use a definition USDA has. It's the idea of the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. This is a really powerful definition. You're talking about this sustainability. We're not talking about an agricultural system that's going to, be 1 or 2 years in usage. We want to establish a system that for decades and even, centuries down the road, so we can have that capacity to produce food and fiber. And the other thing here is we talk about a living ecosystem. Again, getting back to the concept of the soil biology, we need to get farmers to understand as they walk across their field, there's actually as much life going on below the ground as above the ground. And that's kind of a new concept or reintroduction of a concept. I think maybe we might have all knew that, but we just haven't really thought about it, how it applies to food and fiber production. And then this idea of a soil of function, I really get a kick out of this one as I go around the country and talk to producers. And I ask them, what is it you want your soil to do for you? What are those functions that are necessary for you to raise food and fiber crops? And you kind of get a mixed answer. And I really emphasize with food and fiber because soil has many different uses. We build houses, we have roads, we use it for waste disposal. Yeah, but this context, we're talking about raising agricultural products, food and fiber. So what are those functions necessary for food, to raise a plant, to raise a cotton crop or soybean crop or something like that? Well, the first thing is we need to have it cycle nutrients. We think when we spread fertilizer out over the field that gets into the plant. Well, it does eventually, but in any given year, less than 50% of it ends up in that year's crop. Where does it go? It gets into that biological ecosystem in the soil. The second thing is water. We want our soils to let water infiltrate. That's a good thing. We don't want it to run off because we get limited rainfall. It's important to have. But then we also want it to hold on to it, and so it's available at those crucial times of the year, that June or July, whenever in the summer that it gets warm, hot, and dry, that our plant starts to suffer a little bit. We want it to be giving it back up then. So those are two things: infiltration, getting to fill that profile up, and also making it available. We ask our soils to serve as a filtering and a buffering agent. We apply products, pesticides and so forth, onto the ground and to control weeds and so how are these products broken down? Well, it's that biological living ecosystem that helps to break those down, to help to mediate that, to keep them from leaving the field and becoming a problem off-site into some body of water or something like that. And which I think is kind of interesting. We do that, but we don't really treat the biology that well to help encourage that. It just seems to happen there. And this is an easy one: physical stability and support. What do I mean by that? We got to be able to work the fields. We got to be able to plant the crop. We got to be able to manage the crop, and then we got to be able to harvest the crop. If you can't get the crop out of the field, it's not doing us much good. And I can always recall when I first got involved with no-till and soil health back many years ago, farmers would come in and after they no-tilled their crop one year, and they'd say, "Lamb, I really love that no-till because I didn't rut the field up. I didn't rut the field up when I harvested." So you think about, why is that important? Well, because we get confused about, many people think soil health, it takes a long time for soil health to change. No, it doesn't, folks. We need to make a distinction between geological soil formation. That's when we're going from parent materials, whatever the glaciers laid down, or some kind of alluvial deposit that goes through this weathering process. That takes a long time. That's the process that they talk about takes 500 years or 1,000 years to make an inch of topsoil. That's true. But when we're talking about rejuvenating that material that's already been through that process, you can start to see some changes pretty quick. As in my example, being able to harvest a field. Now, it seems like a rather subtle thing, being able to not rut the field up, but how long did that take? It took a year. So my point is, it doesn't, as we implement a system and we continue in the system and just not dabble in it here and there, it's important to understand that we can see changes much quicker than we thought previously. Another function of soil is its habitat for biodiversity. What do I mean by that? It's the home for all those soil organisms that are beneficial and necessary for food and fiber production. And the other thing we need to understand is that 90% of the nutrient cycling, the water infiltration, availability, and so forth, it's mediated by those soil microbes that exist in the soil. And you, as a farmer, a cotton producer, control that. You are driving that system, either benefiting it or being non-beneficial through the decisions you make and the actions that you take on your field. There's another thing I like to tell farmers, that you're no longer a farmer, you're really a habitat manager, because soil is habitat. And you think about it, any organism, whether you're a deer or sage grouse, or whether you're an avascular mycorrhizal fungi that lives in the soil, if you provide the right habitat, they will come. And what do all three living creatures need? Well, you need to have something to eat. That's a good thing. We like to eat. We need something to drink, and you have some place to live. So if you provide those three ingredients, you're going to allow for those organisms to thrive, or you will have them thrive. And let's take an example. I live here in North Carolina. There are a lot of deer in North Carolina. And you think about it, why am I using it? Well, unfortunately, most people forget that the deer population in the East was almost exterminated back in the 20s and 30s due to overharvest and lack of habitat and all these kinds of things that we talk about. So we've made a concentrated effort to allow them to come back. And now, unfortunately, they've become a pest on the other side because they, unfortunately, cars and deer don't mix too well. So what's missing in that ecosystem to keep that in check? Well, there's not a natural predator today as there was 100, 200 years ago to keep that deer population in check. And we as humans aren't doing such a good job. So again, it gets out of balance and it causes problems the other way. So it's kind of a delicate balancing act. The other idea here is this idea of a food web. I think most, I'm not sure when they start to introduce the concept of a food web in schools these days, but I think it's pretty young. But the idea is, the food web, if we have a robust nutrient or a soil ecosystem, can provide all sorts of benefits. And let's walk through this a little bit. You got sunshine, you got leaves. What takes place in the leaf? You got photosynthesis. When you have photosynthesis taking place, you got plant growth. So that means you got leaves going up, roots going down, and that provides biomass. It provides organic matter in the soil. So as these root cells slough off, as plants die and decay, you have this, what we call a trophic level, that's made up of various microbes, bacteria, fungi, nematodes. They feed on that, okay? So that's a good thing. And then you have other organisms feed on them. You got bacteria who are consuming organic matter, and then you have protozoa feeding the bacteria or eating the bacteria. What's that called? That's called mineralization. How does that work? Well, a bacteria has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 5 to 1. Protozoa have one that's 30 to 1. What's that mean? They got to eat 5 or 6 bacteria in order to get enough carbon to maintain their metabolism. So what happens when they do that? They overeat on the nitrogen, and voila, what happens? That's released into the soil medium there, and that becomes plant available nitrogen. That's mineralization. When it's tied up in the organisms, that's immobilization. So getting that predator to prey balance is very important, and that's the beginning of nutrient cycling. And the other thing here too is you got pest management going on. Nematodes get a bad rap because they eat roots. That's a given thing. But there's also nematodes and other organisms at higher trophic levels that eat nematodes. So again, if you're having a problem that way, it could be that your food web is not functioning the way it is because of activities that you've done. So kind of summarize this little part here. Soil we need to look at is it's a living factory, and its factory workers are macroscopic in size. They need water, they need a place to live, and they need something to eat. And it's all being powered by the sun. It's that conversion of sunlight. And the key here is management. Farm management activities either improve or degrade soil health. And we'll talk more about tillage and fertilizers and the impact of these other things as I go through the rest of the webinar here. The other thing is that there's producers out here who has adapted this and are being very successful. These are our soil health farmer mentors in North Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas that we're working with. And these gentlemen that are producing now, they represent about 28,000 acres of cotton being produced in a given year. So it's not that these are small-time producers. And they've been able to incorporate the soil health principles that you'll be learning throughout the course of the webinar series into their operations and maintaining some benefits. One key benefit, I'll talk about Sonny Price real quick. He's been able to, he lives in the coastal plains area of Dillon, South Carolina, which is right on the North Carolina border. And he's been able to reduce, in some cases, eliminate the need for subsoiling because he is following a very rigid soil health management system. So what's that mean? That means he's saving $30, $35 an acre because he's getting the benefits of using a cover crop to help offset that. Again, we'll talk more about that as we move along. All right, let me introduce the word ecology. That word gets thrown around back when I was in school. That was kind of new. That's a long time ago. And we never really linked ecology with agriculture. We thought those were two different areas of study. But really, when you think about it, the definition is this idea that it's the study of relationships between people, animals, plants, and their environment. And it's this interconnectedness that we're looking at. The idea that when you have an impact somewhere in that ecosystem affects other areas within the ecosystem. So when you do something above ground, it's going to impact what's going on below ground as far as the habitat for those soil microbes and those that thrive and can tolerate those conditions that you've created. So that's a good thing. We need to understand that. And the other one, I kind of apologize. This is kind of a busy slide, but it's kind of getting back to this idea of looking in agriculture from an ecology perspective. As you drive down the road, you see all sorts of landscapes. On my way to the office here this morning, I noticed you see around here in North Carolina, you see a deciduous hardwood. That's what we call the steady state or the climax community. What's that mean? That means given time, over time, that's the way Mother Earth intended this area of the country to look. You know, you got deciduous hardwood trees, you got lots of vegetation growing up on the bottom of the understory, you know, and we as humans have come over and hacked out the wilderness, if you will, and converted most of this land to cropland. So you have different scenarios going on. So what's going on? You have these steady state communities around here, the hardwood trees. Out west, you'd have the prairies and tall grass prairies, that type of thing. But they have a robust water cycle. They have a good food web, and they have a good nutrient cycling going on. Those are taking place. Same amount of sunshine, same amount of rain hits that land as the field adjacent to it, which could be a crop field. And these cycles aren't functioning quite as well. The nutrient, the water cycle, and the food web don't function quite as well. Well, why is that? Well, when you look at a system, you drive out there and you see this prairie, and how does it produce all this biomass? If biomass is using that as the product or the indicator of success, the volume of biomass produced, how does it do that without any human inputs? You know, and same thing with a forest. How does it grow all these trees and produce all this hardwood or understory vegetation without any human inputs? It's kind of boggles the mind. And is there anything we can learn from these systems that is applicable to agriculture? So go back to my slide here. So you think about common characteristics of the woods, the steady state community that I've been talking about. What do they have in common? Well, there's very little disturbance. You know, you might have an occasional fire come through. You might have a tree fall over and uproot thing. But as far as a constant annual turnover, no, that's not happening. That just doesn't take place. You know, the other thing that's characteristic is it's got a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different plants growing. You know, they say in a prairie, you may have anywhere from 20, 30, 40 different plant species of grasses and forbs, a mix like that, growing in any square foot or square yard or whatever unit you're measuring that by. That's a lot of diversity. You know, same thing with a forest. You have, hardwood trees. You got the second generation trees coming up. You got a lot of vegetation understory growing. So you have a lot of plant diversity growing on. Well, what's the benefit of that? It doesn't take a lot of human input. And again, these ecosystem services, nutrient cycling, water cycling, and so forth, work very well. When you contrast that to an agricultural field, that's a lot of disturbance. You got a lot of annual tillage going on, multiple trips across the field. You got a lot of chemical and biological disturbance going on, which I'll talk more about here in a minute. They're generally characterized pretty low plant diversity. You know, a cotton peanut rotation is not very diverse, or a cotton corn rotation is not very diverse. You know, why is that important? Because it's those plants that feed the biology in the soil. They put out exudates. They put out chemical or liquid exudates into the soil that feed a range of biology. So if all we're doing is feeding our soil the exudates from a corn plant or a cotton plant, that's kind of limits those organisms that benefit from that, because there's a lot more organisms in the soil that require additional food source, if you will. So what's the outcome of those systems? They have high human inputs, and again, these ecosystem services aren't functioning quite as well as they should. This is the outcome. I really like this quote by Ray Archuleta, a friend of mine. He says that the soil is naked, it's hungry, it's thirsty, and it's running a fever. What's Ray mean by that? Well, it's obvious, the naked part. There's not any cover out there. We've left the elements, the soil exposed to the elements, rain, sunshine, those types of things. The other thing is here, lack of food. Why is it hungry? Well, soil microbes feed on carbon. They feed on plant residue. So if you till up the soil and you have that decomposition take place in a very short period of time, those organisms that going to give them a very short period of window of opportunity to eat. So again, they're hungry most of the year. So it's going to only allow those that can thrive under those conditions. The other thing is, it says the soil's thirsty. Why is it thirsty? Because there's low organic matter. The unfortunate thing is we've lost, when we talk about loss of topsoil, but we've actually lost 50, 60% of organic matter in our soils today. And you think about it in the context of what soil organic matter does. It's the ability to hold water. It has a tremendous nutrient involvement in the nutrient cycle, and those types of things. And then the last thing is the soil's running a fever. What's happening here? Well, soils in these conditions, when they have direct sunlight, you get 90, 95 degrees out, ambient air temperature, even 85. You can get soil temperatures that 2 to 3 inches that exceed over 100, 110 degrees. Again, what's that do? It creates a hostile environment for those soil microbes that are most beneficial to food and fiber production. The other thing here, I kind of go back to my conservation perspective here. We look at a picture like this and we think, oh, we see this nice green buffer along a stream or an open ditch or something like that. And we think we have a good conservation practice going here. But the reality is that's really not doing much good. It's where we need the protection is where that raindrop hits. If we're going to rely on practices like filter strips and buffers it's a different approach. Instead of preventing erosion, it tries to reduce off-site sedimentation. That means it's not really doing anything to benefit the land that the cropland above it. And this is a good example. You think about a body of water like this. Generally, the bank is higher than the field. As water leaves a little stream like this, what happens? It gets out of banks. It starts to slow down. Those heavy sediments are deposited there. So in many cases, the field will actually be lower than the edge of a body of water like this. So there's very little opportunity for water to run through there and get sediment removed from it. And the other thing is we worry about soil detachment. It kind of gets a pet peeve of mine, I guess. Erosion occurs. We have detachment of sand, silt, and clay particles. And if they don't go very far, we don't consider that a problem until they start to leave the field or gets transported to someplace out of the field. But look what happens when you look at, again, another microscopic view. You have those detachment of soil particles on a flat field. What happens? That goes down and it plugs up the sink. You can kind of see this one right here has been degraded. It's collapsed. There's no way water can move through that because those sand, silt, and clay particles are plugging up the system. Whereas the adjacent particle or profile here, you can see water can move down around these nicely formed soil aggregates that are resisting erosion and allows for root penetration and those types of things. This is what we're striving to get. We talk about, I like to pose this to my conservation friends. We tend to think, what would we do in a situation like this? Well, generally what we would do is we'd run a waterway from one side of the road on the north side. We'd run it all the way from up here and down to this open ditch. And so we would allow that surface water to enter a body, go off, leave the field and not cause any problem. But again, that doesn't do anything to treat where the water's coming from. And so we don't really have infiltration problem or a runoff problem, our agricultural soils have more of a water infiltration problem. How do we overcome that? Well, we adopt soil health management principles that allow water to infiltrate at the point where it is deposited by a rainfall event. And real quickly, we talk about the downward spiral of soil degradation. You got intensive tillage, increased insufficient residue. We raise a lot of low residue crops. Results in organic matter being decreased, increased erosion, subsurface compaction. The other key thing here is we talk about aggregates breakdown. We talk about surface becoming compacted and crusted. Again, increases runoff and reduces infiltration. Increases wind erosion. But this downward spiral just continues to get out of hand. And I guess the point here is that we lead to, if you don't understand how a system is supposed to function, it leads to incorrect solutions or solutions that won't really solve the problem. The ultimate result of this downward degradation is with yield loss, and then ultimately you can result in hunger and malnutrition. And that really takes place in parts of the world that don't benefit from an agricultural support system like we have here in the United States. And we've all seen this surface crusting that takes place due to this downward spiral, and you got the plugging of the soil and increased runoff. So what do? We, instead of trying to figure out what the problem is from a soil perspective, we create a tool that comes in and busts up this crust, thinking that's the solution, when really that just gives us temporary results. And we also, the other problem is we don't really think about, in a lot of cases, poor soil health, poor soil function, having off-site causing problems. Take the Toledo Harbor algae problem. You see that every 2, 3, 4 years. They have green water there in Toledo. Toledo is on the very western end of Lake Erie. You kind of see it down, and this is part where Toledo's at. Well, there's 3.5 million acres of cropland that contribute water to coming through there. Well, there was a study done back in the early 2000s. They adopted what was called the Ohio Phosphorus Reduction Task Force, and they identified a couple things that's interesting. They found out there was too much phosphorus in the water. And you look at this graph here, there was a pretty downward trend over the previous 20, 25 years, and then the amount of dissolved reactive phosphorus, which was contributing to the algae problem. And then in the mid 90s, what happened? That slide, that trend went up, and that's a pretty steep upturn. Well, you think what happened? Well, having worked there, I kind of understand there's a few things going on. We, as an agency, NRCS, when I worked for them, we didn't. These soils are flat, they're poorly drained, they don't really have an erosion problem, but they do have that surface crusting problem. They do have that soil detachment problem that plugged up the system. Okay, so we had a couple things going on, and then in the mid 90s, we had a big advent of the vertical tillage tools. Those 45, 60-foot tools that work the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. So in essence, what we've done, we cause compaction. We know that any piece of steel comes in contact with the soil can cause compaction. So we have that. We've commonly accepted the soil compacted layer. We call it the plow layer. That's just we just accept that as being a fact. We don't think about we can actually get rid of that if we implement systems that improve it. But anyway, what we ended up doing with the vertical till, we shrunk the flower pot. Instead of having compaction at 7, 8, 9 inches, we're having compacted layer at 3 or 4 inches. So what that was a result, which is kind of interesting, this other chart showed the annual water, the discharge going under a bridge upstream of Toledo. And it's right around 5,000 CFS. And now we're, for some reason or other, we're up to 7,000 CFS. What happened? Did we add more acres to the watershed? No. Again, you think about that timeline right in the mid-90s. That's when the advent of these vertical tills systems. So again, if you don't understand the impact that things have on the soil, you come up with incorrect solutions to solve the problem. This is what it looks like. You got these flat, poorly drained, compacted soils, and we're going to get runoff. But don't think that's where it's the only place it's taking place. This is some pictures from a field in Georgia, down by Savannah. That I was doing some training a couple of years ago. I was in Burke County. What I can recall, we were got a big storm come in. We were standing in the middle of a tin roof building, which we all been there and know what that sounds like. We got about an inch of rain in about 30 minutes. When we got through with our training, we left the field and we're heading home, and we noticed on the one side of the road, look at that water standing. It says ponded. You know, same soils, same day, just the other side of the road. And look at where the difference being one's farm conventional till, the other using a strip till tillage system with some other multi-species cover crops. You can see the difference. This is kind of a fun little video with two different people understanding soil function. One of them, you can see this is a producer planting into a hairy vetch and nice cover, multi-species cover crop. He understands the importance of diversity. He understands the importance of keeping a living group growing, those types of things. And you can see the producer on the right has a total misunderstanding of what his field is supposed to do in an agricultural setting. Excuse me. Okay, let's get into this. We'll talk about soil disturbance. And really, I've talked a lot about physical disturbance here, but there are also biological and chemical disturbances. And let me run through these individually and I'll kind of set the stage for the future webinars. What is tillage? Well, it's defined as the physical manipulation of the soil for the purpose of doing what? Well, we like to think about it as managing the previous crop residue. That's a good thing. We want to be able to plow it under. We think about tillage in the concept of controlling weeds or vegetation. We don't like, weeds compete for those resources in the soil that are somewhat limited, water, nutrients, and so forth. We like to be able to use tillage to incorporate amendments, fertilizer, manure. Our soils are degraded, they have a lot of runoff, so we don't want to take that fertilizer and manure off the site, plus it costs us money to apply it, and we want to incorporate that. And then we'd like to have a nice seed bed. We use tillage to prepare the seed bed to plant next year's cash crop, cotton, corn, what have you. But I like to admit, we've done it a long time. Tillage is fun. There's no more manly activity in the world than to jump on a big tractor that's got 300 horsepower and you're pulling a big piece of steel. That's a very manly thing to do. But my point is, a lot of tillage, what we do is just something we've learned from future generations, and no one's ever stopped and really talked about the why behind it. I saw this somewhere, and I think this would make a nice sticker that we ought to put on every piece of tillage equipment. Because it's kind of like a health warning on a pack of cigarettes. Smoke cigarettes, this is what it's going to do. Well, this is what tillage actually does to the soil. It destroys soil aggregates. A soil aggregate is that combination of sand, silts, and clays, and organic matter, and living organisms that form those nice pads that allow for good tilth in the soil. It exposes organic matter to rapid decomposition. As I talked about earlier, chop it up in smaller pieces, allows more edges for the organisms to work on it, and in a short time it goes away. And most of it's released into the atmosphere as CO2. Tillage causes soil compaction. We've known that for years. Compaction. Now we talk about sidewall compaction with corn planting equipment. It damages habitat for soil fungi that are beneficial to breaking down organic matter and providing that biotic glue to hold the soil aggregate together. It creates a hostile environment. You just don't have that. It reduces habitat for the soil food web. It disrupts those nice macro pores. You don't get that nice continuity of pores that allow that water to move down through the profile. And in western parts of the country where you have salinity, it increases the opportunity at the surface there. This is kind of interesting because you're looking at it from a historical perspective. There's a book out there. You can go out there and Google it. Plowman's Folly was written by a gentleman called Edward H. Faulkner. He was, I believe, an extension agent in the Virginia area. And he put forth the idea that the truth is that no one has ever advanced a scientific reason for plowing. That's a pretty profound statement, considering that this was made in 1947, and you think about mankind over the generations from agriculture back, BC days, those types of things. How would he have the audacity to make that kind of a statement? That we've just done it that way. But he also made some other observations in there I think are really pertinent to today, and this is 2019. He says that we've equipped our farmers with a greater tonnage of machinery per man than any other nation. Our farmers have more equipment, more steel, more opportunity, and what have they done with it? They proceeded to destroy the soil in less time than any other people has been known to do in recorded history. And you think he said this in 47. You think about where we're at today, the equipment that we've got today compared to back then it's astronomically different. And that's pretty interesting observation at that point in time. But he also said this too, in connection to that, he said the chief trouble with farming is that we have concerned ourselves with the difficult technique of supplying farm crops with the new materials for growth, fertilizer, pest management, those types of things, when we could easily take full advantage of the almost automatic provisions of nature for supplying plants with complete rations in their secondhand form. What's he talking about? He's talking about a robust nutrient cycling that's being driven by healthy soils, a biological system on which we're providing a carbon source through cover crops and diversity and living roots and those types of things. And he kind of summarizes, he says, what we've done, we've actually made a difficult job of what should be an easy one, because we've only looked at soils from the physical and chemical side of things and have overlooked the biological component. And this kind of sums it up, what he says. You look at two different soils. I mentioned this earlier, the loss of organic matter. A forested soil in the Midwest, organic matter 4.3%. Same soil, adjacent field, monoculture, 1.6%. That's a tremendous loss of organic matter, and it's pretty consistent with whether you're in Iowa or Georgia or you're in Massachusetts, that loss of organic matter due to our farming operations. Let's talk about biological disturbance. There's no diversity in the crop rotation. I mentioned earlier the idea of a continuous cotton crop or cotton peanut or any kind of rotation. That's pretty limited. What that does, it lacks the diversity, lacks the plant exudates that I mentioned, and it really hinders or reduces the diversity within the soil biota, those microbes in the soil. Another form of biological disturbance is overgrazing. I know we're talking about cotton and those types of things, but plants are exposed to intensive grazing tend to have systems that are monoculture in nature, and they have other problems along those lines. Biological disturbance of overgrazing, does the same thing as tillage, but it doesn't invert the soil. It reduces root mass. We all know that plants' roots only grow as deep in the soil as the leaf surface above the ground grows. So if you got a 4-inch tall plant, you got about 4-inch roots. You got an 8-inch tall plant, you got about 8-inch roots. So it's a good correlation there, on how you manage it. It increases weeds, reduces soil fungi, reduces water infiltration, and so forth. And I hate to show this slide because, this is a typical solution to a problem. We don't want cows in the stream. You see the little drainage way down through there. We fenced it out. We provided an alternative watering source. You can see the cow up there, by the water tank. But what have we really done here? We haven't done anything to improve the function of the pasture. It's still overgrazed. It still has excessive nutrients. So to think that we're actually, the cow's not standing in the stream or the creek, but there is a lot of manure that's getting into there. So we really need to think about that in soil health systems. Chemical disturbance, again, I'm not anti-chemical. You need to understand how it affects soil function. Over-application, misapplication of any pesticide, fertilizer, any kind of soil amendment has a negative or potentially negative effect on the soil ecosystem. Most of the herbicides we use impact non-target organisms. If we're going after some fungi, it doesn't just get the non-beneficial, it takes them all out. Pesticides tend to simplify a system, not diversify. They remove the complexity, which means they take out the ability for resilience to take place. And of course, we all know about restrictions for crop rotation and those types of things. So the whole impact of most chemicals have never been evaluated as to their impact on the soil microbes, and that's something that really needs to be considered. Fertilizers. Well, we know that if it short circuits the rhizosphere, that's that area right adjacent to the roots. That's where all the microbes live, the hot spot in the soil, if you will. That's where nutrient cycling takes place. Excessive amounts of fertilizer tend to depress activity of natural nitrogen fixers, like in legumes. They stimulate bacteria to decompose organic matter in a faster time frame. You know, if we provide a nutrient source such as nitrogen early on when the plant's not needing it, a lot of the times bacteria can take it and they'll break down the organic matter. Again, a lot of that's released into the atmosphere. So again, it has an impact. Doesn't say don't use it, but you need to take that in consideration. Same thing with manures. You know, the big thing about manures, yeah, we're adding organic matter and carbon. That's a good thing. But it also tends to raise the phosphorus levels. And we know that when you get phosphorus levels above 100 ppm or 200 pounds per acre, it tends to discourage plants from developing this beneficial and mutualistic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. You know, fungi are important because they actually live within the root of the plant. You know, 80% of the plants we use for food and fiber production benefit from that, but it tends to benefit from that, but it reduces that root mass. And these fungi help to expand the roots. They take water, zinc, phosphorus, and bring it into the plant. And the plant gives it foods, you know, carbohydrates, protein, sugars, those types of things. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But if we have our levels too high, it tends to discourage those from taking place. So again, kind of to summarize here, think about it. Soil is a living factory. Your workers are macroscopic and microscopic inside. They need food, they need water, they need shelter in the proper format for them to live. They need that habitat to survive. Management activities that you choose to do improve or degrade soil. So you can either continue on the process or you can start to learn about the important things that you can do. What are those things? The 4 basic management for soil health principles are minimizing disturbance of the soil, that I talked a lot about, maximizing plant diversity in your rotations and cover crops, keeping a living root growing in the soil. You know, we think about living roots. Plants, we only take advantage of a very small amount of the sunlight that hits the earth's surface. You know, plants, cotton plant only grows for, you know, 100 days or so, 120 days. You think about how active those roots are in that period of time between planting and harvest. Again, a lot of sunlight doesn't benefit the soil. And in keeping it covered as long as possible. You know, that's just critical, not only for the erosion control, but again, providing that carbon as a nutrient source to drive the microbes. And again, the goal is to create the most favorable habitat possible for the soil food web. And you think about these principles, we talk a lot about protecting, controlling erosion. That's what the minimizing disturbance and maximizing cover do. But again, the other two, living roots and diversity, they are the drivers behind providing a food source for your creatures that live in your soil. What's that do? Reducing tillage increases biomass, allows more roots, more diversity, tends to create a more favorable habitat for soil biology, starts to return quicker than you think. Aggregates start to become formed, which allows for water infiltration and also allows for more water holding capacity. Increases runoff is decreased, erosion is decreased, got more organic matter, more nutrients, more topsoil, less energy being used, less tillage is needed, more water is stored. This is that upward spiral of what we're calling soil regeneration. Field conditions are more resilient and consistent from year to year. So you may not benefit and you may not win any yield contest, but you're not going to have these variations, these wide swings in your yield. And that's really what we're after with agriculture. So that's the goal. This is what a healthy soil looks like. Nice aggregation. You got the nice earthworm there. You got nice straight roots. That's what the goal is. So just to remind folks, we're going to have a series of webinars coming up. This is the topics, and hopefully you'll find them worth your time to listen to at your convenience. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Camille.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you, everybody, for joining in with us. If you have any questions for Mr. Lamb, please contact us at info@soilhealthinstitute.org. And as Mr. Lamb mentioned, we will have more webinars coming up in this series. Our next episode will be with Dr. Jennifer Moore-Kucera, who will talk about the links between soil biology and soil health. So if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you should be among the first to access these new episodes of Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton. And we thank you very much, and everybody have a wonderful day.